Most people think of obsessive compulsive disorder in terms of visible behaviors, like excessive hand washing or checking locks. But for some people, the obsession isn't about germs or safety. It's about being a good person. And not just in a general way, but in a deep, consuming need to be morally, ethically, or spiritually right all the time. And that's the heart of scrupulosity. It's not really about true devotion or clear moral reasoning. It's about fear. It's about guilt and self doubt getting stuck on repeat. So when your brain turns your values into a battleground, how do you respond? How do you untangle genuine belief and values from compulsive fear? And more importantly, how do you find a way forward without losing the things that matter to you most? So, in today's video, we're really going to be focusing on how to manage symptoms of scrupulosity. And so, the first big idea is that the goal of treatment for scrupulosity isn't to get rid of the scrupulosity thoughts. And it's not to feel totally certain or to feel completely guilt free. It's about learning to relate to your thoughts and your emotions differently, to change how you respond to them. Most people who struggle with scrupulosity believe that the problem is that they're having these thoughts in the first place, that if they could just stop thinking the wrong thing or avoid doing the wrong thing, they'd be okay. But that's not how the brain works. You can't control your thoughts like that. What you can control is how you respond to them. And one of the central techniques used in treating scrupulosity and OCD more generally is exposure and response prevention, or ERP. And this involves deliberately confronting the thoughts or the situations that trigger your anxiety and resisting the urge to then engage in compulsions. In scrupulosity, those compulsions may be things like repeating a prayer until it feels just right, seeking reassurance from a religious leader, or endlessly reviewing whether you told the truth in a situation. With ERP, instead of neutralizing the anxiety, the idea is that you sit with it. You let the fear spike and you let it pass without doing the compulsion or the thing that usually gives you that brief sense of relief. At first, this might seem impossible, but it's important to understand that it's the ritual is what strengthens the fear. Every time you perform a compulsion, your brain learns this fear is real and I need to do something to escape it. But when you resist the compulsion and nothing bad happens, your brain starts to learn something new. It starts to learn that the discomfort is survivable and temporary. And over time, that's what reduces the power of the obsession and the obsessive thoughts. Now, exposure therapy for scrupulosity is often more complex than for other forms of OCD, and that's because the stakes feel higher. For someone with contamination fears, the risk might be, what if I get sick? But for someone with scrupulosity, the fear might be, what if I go to hell? Or what if I harm someone's soul? The consequences can feel eternal, not just inconvenient. And that's why ERP for scrupulosity has to be approached with a level of sensitivity and courage. Because if the person never learns to tolerate that discomfort, the disorder continues to control their life. Exposure exercises typically start small, like resisting the urge to rephrase a prayer that didn't feel perfectly, or delaying a confession when there's doubt about whether or not it's needed. Over time, these exposure exercises become more challenging. A person might intentionally write something that's slightly ambiguous without editing it obsessively. Or they might sit with the thought, maybe I didn't tell the whole truth, without going back to clarify every detail. And yes, exposures can even include saying something irreverent out loud or imagining thoughts that previously felt forbidden and doing this intentionally. And that's not about being disrespectful to your beliefs. It's about breaking the compulsive cycle that's damaging a person's well being. And one of the biggest challenges in treating scrupulosity is what's called overvalued ideation. And that means the person doesn't just feel anxious, they actually believe the intrusive thought reflects something true or important. So, for example, if a person has the thought that they might have disrespected God, they don't just see it as a distressing mental blip. They treat it as proof that they did something wrong or that their character is flawed and that God will be angry with them. When this happens, it's harder for the person to recognize that the fear is a symptom of OCD, not a reflection of their values. And in those cases, treatment often includes cognitive therapy, which is looking at the thoughts that drive the compulsions and starting to challenge the logic behind them. A big part of this involves shifting away from black and white thinking, because people with scrupulosity often believe that if something isn't perfectly good, then it must be bad. If a prayer isn't completely heartfelt, then it doesn't count. If they can't be sure that they were honest, then they must have been lying. So, cognitive therapy involves helping people see that human behavior is messy, it's nuanced, it's full of uncertainty. That doing something imperfectly is not the same as doing it wrong, and that being unsure is not the same as being guilty. Another helpful shift is moving away from judging yourself as good or bad and instead focusing on behavior. In cognitive therapy, we talk about the idea that character isn't a fixed global evaluation. It's constantly changing. It's made of choices, actions, and growth. The goal isn't to prove to yourself or others that you're a good person. It's to accept that you're human and that mistakes happen and that you can live in line with your values without demanding that you have to be perfect. And this is especially difficult in scrupulosity because the disorder often wraps itself around a person's identity. The anxiety isn't just about doing wrong, it's about being wrong, being defective, being irredeemable. So part of treatment is learning how to sit with that fear rather than trying to erase it. And over time, that allows people to reconnect with their values in a way that's much more flexible, meaningful, and grounded. Another treatment component involves helping people learn to tolerate ambiguity. And this is especially important in scrupulosity, where the desire for certainty becomes all consuming. People want to be absolutely sure that they didn't offend God, or that they didn't lie, or that they didn't do something unethical. But certainty is a bit of an illusion. Life is full of unknowns, and we don't get to have airtight proof that we've done everything right. And so the idea here is to help sit with that ambiguity without trying to resolve it through rituals. One analogy that can help explain this is what I refer to as the bent pole analogy. So if you have a metal pole that's been bent in one direction for a long time, you can't straighten it by moving it back to the center. You actually have to bend it in the opposite direction to help restore it back to upright. And that's kind of how exposure and response prevention works in scrupulosity. You don't just stop the rituals, you deliberately do the opposite of what the disorder demands. Eh, You do this in sort of an overcorrecting way, and you tolerate the resulting discomfort. You challenge the belief that you're bad. You test what happens when you break the cycle, and that's how the brain rewires itself. Now, none of this is easy. In fact, scrupulosity is considered one of the most difficult forms of OCD to treat, partly because the rituals are often mistaken for piety or responsibility, and partly because the guilt can feel more powerful than anxiety. But this exposure and response prevention and cognitive therapy works, and it works best when people are willing to step into that discomfort, face the uncertainty, and challenge the rules of the disorder, not by arguing with it, but by refusing to obey it. For some people, that might mean involving spiritual leaders or family members who can support the process. When faith is involved, it's helpful if a person's religious community understands that treatment isn't about dismissing belief. It's about untangling fear from a person's faith. In fact, many people find that after therapy, they're able to return to their spiritual life with a lot more freedom and clarity and sense of peace. Ultimately, the goal isn't to eliminate every intrusive thought or every flash of guilt. The goal is to stop giving the thoughts the power to run your life. Scrupulosity takes the things that you care about the most and turns them into weapons against you. And so treatment helps to reclaim those values, not by doing more rituals, but by letting go of the fear that you have to prove your worth. The thoughts may still come, the doubts may still surface, but your response to them can change, and that's what sets a person free from scrupulosity. And if you're interested in learning more about OCD, I'd encourage you to check out this video. So that's all for today's video. As always, thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one.